farmers' minds. Have you ever been scooping out food for your dog or cat? Or maybe you just saw one of those super fancy commercials for human-grade pet food.
Oh yeah, those are everywhere now.
Right. And you stopped for a second and thought, but why though? Like seriously, why do our furry friends eat what they eat?
It seems like such a simple question, doesn't it? But the answer is actually a pretty wild ride.
Totally. It takes us through history, science, even some surprising money stuff.
It's so true. We often just pour the kibble or, pop open a can without really thinking about the incredible story behind that meal.
So today on Study Hall. But why though? Where we explore the origins of everything, we're going to take a super deep dive into the fascinating and, trust me, sometimes totally unexpected world of pet food.
Yeah, get ready for some surprises.
That's our mission today. We're going to dig up the absolute best nuggets of knowledge from all sorts of sources. We're talking ancient historical texts, like stuff that tells us what medieval dogs actually munched on.
Right, all the way up to cutting-edge industry reports and the latest scientific research.
Exactly. Our goal is to give you a super efficient shortcut to being really well informed about something you probably interact with every single day. Pet food.
So get ready for some major aha moments and hopefully maybe a chuckle or two as we kind of unravel this whole thing.
Okay, let's do it. Where do we start? Way back.
All right, let's unpack this by traveling way, way back in time. For literally thousands of years, dogs and cats haven't just been, wild animals roaming around.
Right, they've lived right alongside humans. Super long time.
But picture this. They weren't always the pampered couch potatoes that snooze on our laps today. That's a pretty recent thing, relatively speaking.
Definitely not. Back then, they were primarily working animals, super important ones.
Yeah, think about it. Dogs were essential for guarding livestock, helping hunters track down game, even controlling pesky vermin.
And cats, they were the original pest control, right? Like, invaluable for keeping rodent populations in check, protecting grain stores and homes from mice and rats.
Absolutely critical. They weren't just cute companions lounging around.
No way! They were vital partners in survival. Seriously important jobs.
So here's a thought-provoking question for you, our listener.
Yeah.
For thousands of years, before pet stores and, fancy bags of kibble,
Yeah, before all that stuff.
what do you think people fed these hardworking dogs and cats? Was it always just, fresh meat, like they were mini wolves and lions living in the house?
Hey, was it something entirely different? Maybe something perhaps a bit more, creative?
Yeah, maybe something cobbled together.
If you're imagining piles of raw steak, maybe prepare to be completely surprised.
Oh, you are absolutely right to think that. Because that's where our historical journey takes a truly unexpected turn, especially when we look at, say, medieval Europe.
Okay, medieval times, knights and castles,
Yeah.
and pet food.
Sort of. It turns out that for a very, very long time, fresh meat was decidedly not the primary diet for working dogs. Not the everyday stuff anyway.
Wait, really? Not meat? For hunting dogs?
Nope. In fact, it was kind of the opposite for their day-to-day meals.
Here's where it gets really interesting. We're talking about medieval hunting dogs here, okay? These were like the elite athletes of their time, highly trained, incredibly valuable.
Top-tier animals, absolutely. Bred for speed, endurance, intelligence, the works.
Right. Now, based on manuals written by folks who were actually there, we have this text called The Master of Game.
Oh, yeah. Who wrote that?
It was penned by Edward of Langley, the second Duke of York, who, fun fact, was the granduncle of King Edward IV. So, a guy who knew his hunting dogs.
Okay, royalty writing about dog food. Got it. So what did he say?
He said the main food recommended for these highly prized animals was, are you ready for this?
Lay it on me.
Bread. Yes, plain old bread, like loaf bread.
Bread, you kidding?
Yeah.
For hunting dogs. Not like prime cuts of venison or whatever they caught.
Nope, simple bread, that was the staple.
Wow. Okay, my mind is kind of blown. So where did meat fit in then? Was it just, that never?
Meat, surprisingly, was more of a special treat, almost like a performance bonus,
Okay. Like after a good day's work.
Exactly. It was often given to them only after a successful hunt. And this wasn't just random generosity or tossing them scraps.
No, there was a reason.
Yeah. It was actually a brilliant early example of behavioral conditioning, like training through rewards.
Makes sense. So the idea was to create a powerful positive association. Successful hunt equals a tasty, meaty reward.
Precisely. This principle, rewarding desired behavior, it underpins so much of modern animal training even today.
It really shows that even centuries ago, people kind of intuitively understood how to shape animal behavior using incentives. Pretty smart.
And it gets even wilder and maybe a little bit squishy.
Oh boy. Squishy how?
Well, the Duke's manual describes something called the curé. Sounds kind of fancy,
All
right?
right, yeah, sounds French. What was it?
Okay, get this. It was a maybe gruesome but incredibly practical method. They'd take chopped up bread,
The bread again? Okay.
right, and they'd mix it with the blood and the unusable offal, basically, the guts and other parts of the hunted animal that humans wouldn't eat or couldn't easily preserve.
Whoa. Okay, bread and guts. Appetizing.
And then get this. It was served inside the hollowed out carcass of the hunted animal itself.
Wait, they put the bread and blood mix back inside the dead animal?
Yep. Can you imagine? Talk about linking the hunt to a reward. It sounds pretty wild, maybe a bit gross to us now.
Understatement of the year.
But for its time, it was an incredibly effective way to use literally every part of the animal and to powerfully reinforce the dog's hunting instincts.
Wow. Okay. It was like their version of a victory feast, served in the ultimate dish. Waste not, want not, I guess.
Definitely. And that practicality, feeding animals in different environments, it also led to some incredibly innovative solutions just driven by sheer necessity.
Right. Adapting to the local conditions.
Exactly. Think about, say, subarctic tribes living in extreme cold, really harsh conditions.
Right. Not exactly easy living up there.
Well, in places like that, fresh meat wasn't always readily available or easy to store long term, especially, before refrigeration existed.
Makes sense. So necessity really was the mother of invention, wasn't it? Pushing people to be incredibly resourceful with whatever they had on hand.
Totally. And their solution, we might call them fish sticks, but definitely not the kind you find in the freezer aisle today.
Huh. Okay, so not breaded and fried then.
No. We're talking about long poles of cleaned spruce wood. They'd use these to basically impale stacks of fish.
Like shish kebabs, but with fish. On a big stick.
Kinda. These fish were then dried and cached, meaning stored away safely for later use, probably buried in the snow or ice.
And these dried fish, they weren't just convenient, right? They must have been good food, too.
Oh, yeah. Packed with essential nutrients and, crucially, fat. Fat was absolutely vital for survival and maintaining energy in that extreme cold.
Ah, the calories, got it.
They were essentially the original energy bars for working dogs, helping them pull sleds and hunt in freezing temperatures. Super dense nutrition.
That's a fantastic example of using native resources in a truly ingenious way. Very clever.
And you can connect this resourcefulness to later historical periods too, right? Like those early Antarctic explorers.
Oh yeah, the guys with the sled dogs. They likely adopted similar resourceful methods. When you're in an environment that extreme, with really limited supplies,
You got to use what's there.
exactly. You have to rely on what's locally available and what you can preserve through drying, salting, or caching.
Yeah.
It's all about survival, pure and simple.
I even read this unexpected anecdote about some of those polar explorers themselves. Not their dogs, but the humans.
Oh yeah, what do they eat? Besides penguins, maybe.
Well, to get enough calories to survive the bitter cold, they would consume astounding amounts of fat, sometimes like 3 to 5 sticks of butter a day.
5 sticks of butter. Just plain butter.
Just pure butter. It really makes you think about how high-fat foods would have been an absolute necessity for their dogs in such scenarios, too, just to keep them going and warm.
Wow. Every single calorie counted for both the people and the animals. No room for error.
So these examples, they truly highlight how, for centuries, people were incredibly creative and resourceful with what they fed their animals, long before pet food was a thing.
Yeah, way before it was a commercial manufactured product you could just buy in a bag.
They weren't just throwing random scraps either. They were often thinking about nutrition and behavior, even without modern science or fancy labels.
They were just solving problems with ingenuity based on observation and need.
So, okay, we've gone from medieval bread mixed with guts and dried fish sticks to what seems like a completely different universe today.
Right. Aisles and aisles of kibble, cans, pouches.
How did we make that massive leap? From these inventive, often resourceful, and sometimes pretty wild diets to today's perfectly portioned kibble and gourmet wet food.
That transition, that's really the birth of an entire industry. And it was driven by big changes in human society itself.
Like people moving to cities.
Exactly. Commercialized pet food started really evolving in the late 1800s. Cities were growing rapidly. People were moving away from farms.
Less access to farm animals and their scraps, I guess.
Right. And pets were also starting to shift from being primarily working animals to more like companions. So the need for convenient, ready-made food just grew and grew.
But it wasn't an instant leap to the dry kibble we know today, was it?
Oh, no, not at all. The earliest products were often hard, flour-based biscuits, much simpler than what we see now. Sometimes they contained meat meal, but they were pretty basic, kind of like a dog biscuit, literally.
Okay, so biscuits first, then what? When did the familiar stuff show up?
Well, then came the big technological leaps, which really transformed the game for pet food. Just like with human food production, actually.
Ah, borrowing tech from the human side. Makes sense.
Two key processing techniques were adapted: extrusion and canning.
Extrusion? That sounds kind of industrial. What is that?
It's what gives us those familiar dry kibble pellets. Imagine a giant industrial-sized pasta maker, sort of.
Okay, I can picture that.
Ingredients like grains, meats, vitamins, all that stuff are mixed together into a dough. Then it's forced through a die, which is like a shaped opening, at really high pressure and heat.
And that cooks it.
Yeah, this process cooks the food, it expands, makes it puff up, and creates those crunchy, uniform shapes that are super easy to store and feed. It's actually a really ingenious process for mass production.
Okay, so that's dry food. What about wet food?
Well, that's where canning comes in, of course.
Yeah.
This process involves sealing food in airtight cans and then heating them to very high temperatures.
To make it last longer.
Exactly. It kills bacteria and prevents spoilage. This preserves nutrients well, some nutrients and flavor, making it shelf-stable and super convenient. Pop the top and serve.
What's absolutely fascinating here is how pet food processing methods increasingly mirrored human food production, isn't it?
It really is. Borrowing techniques and technologies that had already proven effective and safe for people, it was just a natural progression, especially as pets became more like family.
That makes so much sense when you think about it. If the technology exists to make human food safer, more nutritious, more efficient, why wouldn't you adapt it for pets?
Especially as they move from the barnyard to the bedroom, so to speak.
Right. But then we have even newer innovations coming onto the scene, like the relatively recent fresh cooked processes.
Ah, yes, the stuff you find in the fridge section now.
Yeah. This highlights a clear and growing trend towards less processed pet food. It often looks incredibly similar to something we might actually eat ourselves.
It really does. Packaged in refrigerated containers, looking like a, gourmet meal prep for your dog.
So, what's the science behind all this processing, especially thinking about nutrients? Does cooking it like that affect the food?
Oh, absolutely. And that's a really critical point. What's truly fascinating here is the science behind nutrient retention during all this processing.
Because cooking changes food, right?
Exactly. You see, any kind of processing, whether it's baking, extruding like for kibble, or retorting for cans, can unfortunately destroy vital nutrients. It's just a consequence of heat and pressure.
Okay, like what kind of nutrients?
Well, let's take vitamin B1, also known as thiamine, as a perfect example. The Association of American Feed Control Officials, we'll call them AAFCO for short, they're super important.
AAFCO, got it. Key organization.
Right, they set the standards. AAFCO suggests that traditional processing can lead to a significant loss of thiamine. Get this, up to 90% of thiamine can be lost in the final product.
90%. That's huge. Almost all of it gone.
It's a staggering amount, and thiamine is really important.
Why? What does thiamine do for pets?
Well, thiamine is crucial for a pet's energy metabolism, nerve function, and just their overall well-being. A severe deficiency can lead to really serious neurological issues.
Okay, so losing 90% is definitely not good. How do the different processing methods stack up then? Like kibble versus cans versus this fresh stuff?
Good question. Let's compare. When we look at extrusion, the process that creates dry kibble,
The pasta maker thing.
right, you typically see about a 70% retention of thiamine. So better than 10%, but still a 30% loss.
What affects that number? Can they make it better?
Well, factors like the barrel temperature in the extruder, the moisture levels in the ingredients, even the speed of the screw pushing the dough through, they all significantly impact how much thiamine survives.
So hotter and faster might be more efficient for making kibble, but maybe not the best for keeping the vitamins in.
Generally, yes. The hotter and faster the process, the more nutrient degradation you might see. So manufacturers have to carefully balance that efficiency with nutrient preservation. It's a trade-off.
Okay, 70% retention for kibble. How does canning compare? That involves really high heat too, right?
It does. Retorting, which is that high-heat, high-pressure process for canning wet food, actually results in thiamine retention that's quite a bit lower. It's around 40%.
Wow, only 40%. That's even lower than kibble. Why is that?
You might think that, but here's the interesting counterpoint. Despite the severe time and temperature conditions of canning, the exposure to other destructive forces is different.
Like what?
Things like light exposure and physical agitation or shear, which means forces that kind of tear or distort the food as it's mixed and processed. That exposure is actually minimal compared to the vigorous mixing and friction inside an extruder.
Ah, okay. So even though canning is super hot, it's maybe gentler in other ways that affect different nutrients.
Exactly. It helps to balance things out for other nutrients, even if thiamine specifically takes a bigger hit during canning. It's complex.
It really is. It's not just about heat. So what about the new kid on the block there? The fresh cooked method. Does it live up to its promise for keeping nutrients?
This is where it truly gets interesting for pet parents who are really focused on maximum nutrient preservation. Fresh cooked processes are generally much gentler.
How so?
They often use lower temperatures for shorter periods, much more like how you might cook a meal at home. Think sous vide or gentle steaming.
And the results. Does it save the thiamine?
Well, recent data has shown really impressive thiamine retention, often around 87% in processes designed to mimic these fresh-cooked procedures.
87%. Okay, that's way better than 70% or 40%.
Huge difference, right? And this significantly higher retention really explains why some pet parents are drawn to these newer, less processed options.
Yeah, they're looking for a product that's as close to its natural state as possible, hoping to avoid that nutrient loss from harsher processing.
Precisely. They see it as delivering more of the original goodness.
That's a massive difference. So all this innovation, all these different methods, it ties directly into the booming business that the pet food industry is today, right?
Oh, absolutely. We're not talking about some small niche market here.
Wait, how big is it?
We're talking about an estimated $42 billion industry in the U.S. alone, and it's still growing rapidly.
$42 billion just in the U.S. Wow, that's a lot of kibble in cans.
It really is. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the COVID-19 pandemic actually gave this growth a significant, albeit unexpected, boost.
How did the pandemic affect pet food?
Well, during that period, remember all the pandemic puppies and kittens? 1 in 5 U.S. households adopted a pet.
1 in 5. That's a massive number of new pets needing food.
Exactly. Imagine that surge in demand hitting almost overnight. This explosion in pet ownership, combined with all the supply chain challenges we faced.
Oh yeah, getting anything was tough for a while.
Right. And add the fact that people were spending much more time at home, forming even closer bonds with their pets during lockdowns.
Your pet became your coworker, basically.
Pretty much. All of that really pushed many pet owners to change how they bought and even thought about pet food.
It makes perfect sense. Suddenly, your pet isn't just an animal you see in the evenings. They're right there with you all day, every day. They become even more like family.
Totally integrated.
And with everyone staying home, convenience became absolutely king, didn't it?
Oh, for sure. That's why we saw a huge rise in online pet food sales and subscription services, getting that heavy bag delivered right to your door. Yes, please.
Made life so much simpler for busy pet parents, especially when going to the store felt risky or complicated.
And we saw the industry respond. A great case study of this trend is Mars Pet Care, acquiring Nom Nom.
Mars Pet Care. They're huge, right? Like Pedigree and Whiskas?
Exactly. They are a colossal player in the pet industry. Nom Nom, on the other hand, is one of the major fresh-cooked pet food brands, the kind that gets delivered to your home.
So big traditional company buys the new fresh food delivery company.
Precisely. Their acquisition of Nom Nom shows just how much even the biggest companies are adapting to these changing consumer preferences and the demand for more natural, convenient options. It's a really clear signal of where the market is heading.
So it's clear, pets aren't just animals anymore. They're truly becoming like our children or full-fledged family members.
The humanization trend is undeniable.
And their food is evolving right alongside our own expectations for quality, safety, and convenience. But with all this humanization and this massive demand,
There had to be rules, right?
you can bet there are some seriously strict rules and incredibly sophisticated technology involved to keep our furry friends safe and healthy. It's not the Wild West anymore.
That's absolutely right. That concept of pet humanization is incredibly important here. It's this idea that pets are increasingly treated like children or integral members of the family.
Sharing our homes, our beds, sometimes even our anxieties.
Too true. And this profound shift directly influences pet food production. It drives a massive demand for higher quality, safer, and much more transparent products.
People want to know what they're feeding their pets, right? Like exactly what's in the bowl and where it came from. No more mystery meat.
Exactly. And it means pet parents aren't just looking for basic sustenance anymore. They want healthier options, organic choices, and that buzzword we hear so often, human-grade food.
Yeah, human grade. We got to talk about that. It's about applying our own food standards, our own desires for wholesome, safe food to what we feed our animal companions.
It's a sign of how deeply we care, isn't it? We want the best for them, just like any family member.
So who makes sure this actually happens? Who are the gatekeepers of pet food safety?
Okay, so in the U.S., think of it like a team effort with different important roles. The two main bodies overseeing pet food production and labeling are the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA,
We all know the FDA.
right? And the Association of American Feed Control Officials, which we've mentioned, AAFCO.
Okay, FDA and AFACO. So what does each one actually do? Let's break it down. What's the FDA's job?
Think of the FDA as the federal police force for pet food, essentially. They have direct enforcement power. They inspect manufacturing facilities and ingredients suppliers to make sure everything meets federal safety standards.
And if something goes wrong, like pets get sick.
They investigate consumer complaints about pet food. They act on reports of illness or contamination. They can issue recalls, seize products, and enforce federal laws. They have teeth.
Okay, so FDA is the enforcer. What about AAFCO? You said they don't regulate or approve things directly?
That's right, and this is a really important distinction because their role is a bit different but equally crucial. AAFCO does not regulate, test, approve, or certify pet food themselves.
So they're not like giving stamps of approval.
No. Instead, think of AAFCO as like a consortium of legal experts, scientists, and state and federal regulators. They establish model language for pet food rules and regulations.
Model language, like suggestions.
Kind of. They write the best practices, the definitions like what complete and balanced means, and the guidelines for labeling and nutrition. Then, individual states may choose to adopt this model language into their own state laws.
Ah, okay. So AAFCO provides the blueprint, the ideal set of rules.
Exactly. And then states decide whether to build their house using that blueprint. And then they're the ones who enforce those rules within their borders. It creates a framework for consistency across the country, even if enforcement is state level.
That's a really vital distinction. So AFCO lays the groundwork, states enforce it. And they've been doing this for a while.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
AFCO has been around for over 100 years, founded in 1909. They first included specific language for pet food in their model bills way back in 1917.
Wow, 1917. People were thinking about standardizing pet food even then.
They were starting to, yes, and the regulations evolved. For instance, in 1933, they prohibited using the word pure in a brand name because it could be misleading. What does pure even mean?
Good point. Hard to define.
And then a huge step in 1969, they established the very first definition for complete and balanced pet food. That means it provides all the essential nutrients a pet needs for a specific life stage, according to current science, without needing extra supplements. That label is really important.
Okay, so it's a true collaboration then. FDA provides federal oversight and enforcement.
AAFCO sets the nutritional standards and labeling guidelines.
And the states adopt and enforce those rules. But who's ultimately responsible for making sure the food in the bag meets those standards?
Ultimately, while AAFCO sets the standards and the FDA provides oversight, it's the pet food company's primary responsibility to formulate their products to meet or exceed those AAFCO nutritional standards and follow all safety regulations.
And then it's the state feed control official's job within each state to inspect and test products to make sure the laws and rules adopted by their state are actually being followed.
Exactly. Everyone has a part to play in that chain of responsibility.
And a big part of that responsibility for the manufacturers themselves was really solidified with a specific FDB rule, wasn't it? The PCAF rule.
Yes, the Preventative Controls for Animal Food, or PCAF rule,
Yeah.
published in September 2015. This rule really upped the ante for food safety across the board for animal feed, including pet food.
What did it do?
It established strict good manufacturing practices, or GMPs, basically baseline sanitation and operating procedures. And crucially, it required something called hazard analysis and risk-based preventative controls, or HARPO.
HARPOC. Okay, sounds technical. What does that mean in practice?
It means facilities are required to have a detailed, written food safety plan. This plan has to include a thorough hazard analysis.
Like finding all the potential dangers.
Exactly. They have to identify every potential biological hazard, like salmonella or listeria, chemical hazards like toxins or cleaning residues, or physical hazards like bits of metal, glass, or plastic.
Stuff that could accidentally get into the food.
Right. They identify anything that could reasonably be present in their ingredients or introduced during their processes. Then they have to determine which of these hazards are significant enough that they require preventative controls to minimize or prevent them.
So putting steps in place before something goes wrong?
Precisely. It's
Mhm.
proactive, not just reactive. They also need a process to verify that these controls are being implemented correctly
Hmm.
and are actually working. Are they testing? Are they monitoring temperatures? Are they checking equipment?
So it's like mapping out every single potential risk point in the factory, from raw ingredients coming in the door to the final packaging, and putting safety measures in place before a problem even arises.
That's a great way to put it. It's a huge step towards ensuring safer pet food consistently.
Okay, so back to that term human grade we keep hearing. What does it really mean? You said AFCO coined it. Is it just fancy marketing or does it have teeth?
That's an excellent question because it does have a specific regulated meaning now, thanks to AFCOL. It specifically means pet food manufactured in a manner consistent with regulations for ready-to-eat human food products.
Okay, manufactured like human food. What does that actually entail?
Well, it's a significant distinction because most pet food, even high-quality stuff, isn't subject to the exact same rigorous scrutiny and regulations as human food.
Unless it carries that human grade label.
Correct. Unless it's labeled human grade. When it is, you generally observe a much greater level of care and diligence throughout the entire production process.
Like what kind of differences?
Things like all ingredients having to be edible for humans and sourced from human food suppliers, the manufacturing facility needing to meet human food safety and hygiene standards, which are often stricter than feed standards, and sometimes even requiring separate production lines or stringent cleaning protocols to prevent any cross-contamination from feed-grade ingredients. It's a whole different, higher bar.
That makes perfect sense. If it's being made to human food standards, you'd absolutely expect that higher bar for everything ingredients, cleanliness, the whole process.
Right. And that includes how they check for contaminants, which is a huge part of food safety for both humans and pets.
Yeah, you mentioned physical hazards like metal. That seems like a big potential problem in a factory with lots of machinery.
It is. Metal contamination, maybe a tiny piece of a broken machine part, a screw, a bit of wire, or even something that came in with raw ingredients, can accidentally get into the food during processing.
And that could cause major issues, right?
Definitely. It could potentially damage expensive processing equipment downstream. It could contaminate an entire batch of food, leading to a costly recall. Or worst case scenario, it could injure a pet if ingested. So preventing it, or at least detecting it, is critical.
How did they used to check for it, and how do they do it now?
Well, in the past, processors often used simpler methods, like magnetic separators, usually placed right at the beginning of the production line.
To catch iron and steel.
Exactly, to try and catch ferrous metals. But those wouldn't catch things like aluminum or stainless steel. Today, the technology has evolved significantly. State-of-the-art metal detectors are common now.
How are they better?
They're incredibly sensitive. They optimize the inspection process, drastically increase detection sensitivity for all kinds of metals, and efficiently remove contaminated products, both wet and dry food, while minimizing the waste of perfectly good food. They're much more precise.
So where exactly do they put these high-tech metal detectors in a typical pet food factory? Is it just one check at the end?
Oh no, it's definitely a multi-stage approach. Think layers of safety. Catching contaminants at the very start of the line as the raw ingredients come in is usually the most cost-effective solution
Why there?
because it prevents those raw material contaminants from getting mixed into larger batches or potentially damaging expensive equipment like grinders or mixers further down the line. Catch it early.
Makes sense. Where else?
Then, after processes like mixing and grinding, where metal fragments could potentially be introduced from the machinery itself, they often use pipeline metal detectors.
Pipeline for liquidy stuff.
Exactly. They inspect the product as it flows through pipes, especially for high-viscosity slurries like the mixes used for wet pet food or treats. These detectors are designed to integrate seamlessly into the pipes and be really easy to clean to prevent any bacterial buildup.
Smart. Catch it early, catch it after mixing. What about right before it goes into the bag or can?
Yep, that's another key point. Before packaging, especially for dry kibble, they use gravity metal detectors. These are typically positioned in chutes or hoppers where the kibble is free-falling.
So the kibble just falls through a sensor.
Essentially, yes. It falls through a detection zone. And finally, after the food is actually in its final packaging, the bag, can, pouch, whatever,
One last check.
there's a crucial final check. This ensures overall safety and compliance with regulations before the product leaves the factory. It catches any contaminants potentially introduced during the packaging process itself, or just confirms the effectiveness of all the earlier checks. Belt and braces.
It sounds like they've really got it covered. But I've heard that wet pet food can be a real challenge for these metal detectors. Is that true? Why?
It absolutely is true. Wet pet food is notoriously tricky. Because of its high moisture content and often high mineral or salt content, sometimes iron from meat ingredients,
Yeah.
it's highly conductive. It creates what's called a product effect.
Product effect. What's that?
Essentially, the food itself acts like a weak metal signal to the detector. Its conductivity can trick the metal detector into mistakenly interpreting the product itself as a metal contaminant.
So the detector thinks the food is metal.
Sometimes, yes. Or even tiny air bubbles or voids in the product flow as it goes through a pipeline detector can disrupt the signal and trigger false rejects.
And false rejects mean?
Wasting perfectly good food, stopping the production line, increased costs, decreased efficiency. It's a big headache for manufacturers,
Okay, so how do they solve that problem? You can't exactly dry out wet food just to inspect it.
right? You need a smarter detector. To overcome this product effect, manufacturers use powerful digital signal processing technology, DSP, within the metal detectors.
Fancy computer brains inside.
Pretty much. This advanced tech allows the detector to learn the signature of the food product itself and then filter it out. It can clearly distinguish the difference between the signal caused by the food's natural conductivity and the signal from an actual foreign metal contaminant.
That's clever. Like teaching the machine to ignore the background noise and only listen for the alarm bell.
That's a great analogy. This sophisticated filtering ensures accuracy and minimizes those costly false rejections.
What about the packaging itself? That must cause issues too. Like, how do they inspect food in different types of containers, especially if the container itself is metal or has metal in it?
Great question. Different packaging presents different challenges. For trays, which are generally plastic,
Like those little single serving trays?
yeah, the plastic itself isn't usually an issue for metal detectors. However, the high moisture content of the wet food inside the tray still creates that product effect problem we just discussed.
So they need the smart detectors for trays too.
Yes, specialized interceptor metal detectors are often used. These have even more advanced capabilities to differentiate between signals from moisture or minerals within the food and actual metal contaminants, even in challenging products.
Okay. What about pouches? I know a lot of those have shiny foil linings inside for freshness. That seems like it would mess up a metal detector.
You're absolutely right. Pouches often use foil materials, aluminum layers to protect the product and extend shelf life. But this foil can definitely interfere with standard metal detectors, basically acting like a shield and making it hard to see metal contaminants inside.
So how do they deal with foil?
For this, there are special ferrous infoil metal detectors. These are specifically designed to ignore the non-ferrous metal signal from the aluminum foil and focus intensely on detecting even the smallest ferrous contaminants, like iron or steel, through the foil.
Wow. But what about non-ferrous metals in foil pouches, like a piece of aluminum or glass?
That's where ferrous and foil detectors have limitations, and that's why X-ray inspection systems are also a fantastic option, especially for pouches.
X-ray. Like at the airport?
Similar technology, yes. X-rays can comprehensively detect both metallic and non-metallic threats, things like glass fragments, mineral stone, calcified bone, even some dense plastics regardless of the packaging type, including foil. They see density differences.
Okay, X-ray sounds pretty versatile.
Yeah.
What about the classic pet food container, the can? How do you detect metal inside a metal can? That seems impossible for a regular metal detector.
It is indeed quite challenging, if not impossible, for conventional metal detectors because the signal from the can itself is just overwhelming. It completely masks any smaller signal from inside.
So metal detectors are out for cans.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And this is precisely where X-ray systems really shine and become essential. They are the go-to technology for inspecting canned pet foods because they are completely unaffected by the metal packaging.
How do they work on cans?
The X-ray system scans the cans as they pass through, creating a grayscale image, like a medical X-ray. The software then analyzes these images, looking for anything denser or less dense than the surrounding food. This allows it to identify contaminants like metal, glass, stone, bone, or dense plastics that a metal detector would totally miss in a can.
It's like getting an internal X-ray of every single can going down the line. That's impressive.
It really is. It's a crucial safety step for canned products.
And what about frozen raw pet food? That seems like another tricky one. Are there unique challenges there?
Absolutely. Frozen raw pet food products can pose a challenge because their physical characteristics, things like density and conductivity, can subtly change during the inspection process.
How? Does it start to thaw?
Even just slight thawing on the surface as it moves through a potentially warmer inspection area can alter the product signal. This can lead back to that product effect distortion we talked about, potentially causing false rejects and wasting perfectly good, expensive raw product.
So you need really sensitive detectors for frozen too.
Yes, exactly. To prevent this, manufacturers rely on highly sensitive metal detection and also X-ray systems that are specifically designed and calibrated to handle these variable conditions found with frozen or semi-frozen products. They need to be precise enough to detect real contaminants without being fooled by minor temperature fluctuations.
Okay, so the industry has all these checks, but what about at home? If you're a pet owner choosing to feed raw food, what should you keep in mind for safety in your own kitchen? The FDA has some pretty clear guidelines, right?
They absolutely do, and it's super important for people feeding raw diets to follow them carefully to reduce the risk of illness, not just for the pet, but for the humans in the house too, from bacteria like Salmonella or E. coli.
Okay, what are the key steps?
First, always keep raw pet food frozen until you absolutely need it. Don't leave it sitting out on the counter to defrost for hours.
Got it. Keep it frozen. Then what?
Second, when you defrost it, maybe in the fridge overnight, make sure it's kept completely separate from human food. Use separate containers, maybe stored on the bottom shelf of the fridge so it can't drip onto other foods, and keep it away from food preparation surfaces and any utensils you use for your own meals. Cross-contamination is the big risk.
Right. Separate bowl, separate cutting boards, maybe?
Definitely separate bowls, and yes, ideally a separate cutting board used only for raw pet food. And finally, and this is crucial, thoroughly wash your hands with soap and water after handling the raw food. And meticulously clean and sanitize any surfaces, your countertops, the sink, cutting boards, bowls, knives, anything that may have come into contact with the raw product.
So treat it like you'd treat raw chicken in your own kitchen, basically. Good hygiene is absolutely paramount.
Exactly the same principles apply. Diligence is key to doing it safely.
Wow. Okay. So much goes into that bowl of pet food before it even reaches your home. It's incredible. Pets are truly eating like kings, or at least like very carefully monitored subjects with all these advanced safety measures.
And the industry is working incredibly hard, using sophisticated technology to keep their food safe and meet those regulatory standards.
But even with all that tech and care, there are still some big hurdles, right? Like behind-the-scenes challenges in actually getting that food from the factory to your pet's bowl. It's not as simple as just making more of it when demand goes up.
That's absolutely correct. The pet food industry, for all its advancements, faces some really significant behind-the-scenes hurdles that impact everything from availability on the shelf to the price you pay at the checkout.
Okay, like what? What are the big ones?
Well, first, let's just circle back to that increased demand. As we mentioned, pet ownership surged dramatically, especially during the pandemic. 1 in 5 households got a new pet.
Yeah, that huge jump.
That directly translates to a massive, sustained increase in demand for pet food. This requires manufacturers to escalate their operations, maybe run extra shifts, and often physically expand their facilities, build new lines, new warehouses. And that isn't a quick or cheap thing to do, especially with construction costs and timelines.
That sounds like a good problem to have. In a way, more pets means more customers. But it puts a strain on everything else, like the supply chain.
It definitely does. The supply chain squeeze we've all heard so much about in recent years hit the pet food industry hard too. A major factor is an alarming nationwide shortage of truck drivers.
Really? Still?
Oh yeah, we're talking about an estimated shortage of around 80,000 truck drivers across the country. This, combined with high fuel prices, severely impacts the entire logistics network.
How does that affect pet food specifically?
It impacts the delivery of both the raw ingredients to the factories, grains, meats, vitamins, packaging materials, and then the transport of the finished pet food from the factories to distribution centers, retailers, or directly to your home if you order online. It's bottlenecks everywhere.
So even if the factory can make the food, it might get stuck waiting for a truck.
Precisely. And while rising wages for drivers are helping to attract more people into the profession, those increased labor and fuel costs invariably tick up the final price for consumers. It's a fundamental constraint.
And it's not just about the trucks and drivers, right? It's also the roads they drive on, the ports, the railways, the underlying infrastructure.
Exactly. The broader infrastructure plays a huge role. While the government has committed significant funds like that $550 billion bipartisan infrastructure law for U.S. transportation projects, including $110 billion specifically for upgrading roads and bridges.
That seems like a lot of money.
It is, but these are massive, complex, long-term fixes. They won't solve today's immediate delivery delays or congestion issues overnight. It takes years, even decades, for those benefits to be fully realized.
And what about digital infrastructure? Does that play a part?
Absolutely. There's also a $65 billion investment earmarked for improving high-speed internet access. This is critical for modern business operations. Better tracking of shipments, real-time inventory management, smoother communication between suppliers, manufacturers, and retailers. It improves efficiency across the supply chain, but again, it's a foundational change that takes time to fully implement and optimize.
Okay, so even if the food is made and ready, getting it where it needs to go is a whole other beast. What about inside the factories themselves? Are there labor shortages there too, like finding people to actually make the food?
Unfortunately, yes. That's another major hurdle facing the industry. The U.S. unemployment rate has been hovering at historic lows recently, sometimes around 3.4%, which is the lowest since 1968.
So lots of jobs available, not as many people looking.
Exactly. It makes the workforce incredibly competitive. And large corporations, especially in sectors like e-commerce fulfillment centers or logistics warehouses, are often able to pay higher wages for similar types of industrial jobs, packing, sorting, machine operation.
So they're drawing potential employees away from pet food manufacturing.
That's the challenge. It makes it harder not just to attract new workers to pet food plants, but also to retain the experienced ones they already have. High turnover is costly and disruptive.
So it's a double whammy for pet food producers. Maybe not enough people to drive the trucks, and maybe not enough people to work in the factories making the food.
Precisely. This labor pressure was a huge topic of discussion at the American Feed Industry Association AFIA conference back in 2022.
What were they talking about? How to fix it?
They discussed how companies can make these jobs more attractive and sustainable. Things like ensuring fair treatment, offering decent and competitive pay, having equitable overtime policies, providing better benefits, and maybe even offering family accommodations like flexible scheduling where possible. It's about competing for workers in a tight market.
Does this affect all pet food companies equally? Or are smaller ones hit harder?
It particularly hits smaller pet food processors hard. They might not have the capital to invest heavily in automation robots and automated systems to help offset labor shortages and meet increased production quotas. They often rely more heavily on manual labor, making them more vulnerable when the workforce is tight.
It sounds like a ton of pressure on manufacturers just to keep up with demand, let alone innovate. So what are some of the equipment innovations helping them solve these problems? Helping them keep costs down in the long run, even with rising labor and material costs?
That's a great point. Because the rising cost of the food processing equipment itself, plus all the raw materials, grains, proteins, oils, that's another significant challenge for manufacturers trying to expand or upgrade.
So they need equipment that's not just fast, but efficient and reliable.
Exactly. To help control these long-term operational costs and meet demand, companies like Carrier Vibrating Equipment, for example, specialize in manufacturing highly durable vibrating equipment specifically designed for the tough environment of the pet food industry.
Vibrating equipment, like for moving stuff around.
Yes, things like conveyors and feeders that use vibration to move large quantities of materials like raw ingredients or finished kibble gently and efficiently. Their focus is on durability and efficiency, not just speed.
And they have a specific piece of equipment designed for this, right? Something called the natural frequency feeder. What makes that so special?
That's one of their key innovations. This type of feeder was developed precisely to address the need for systems that can handle really high capacities of materials, tons per hour, as manufacturers scale up production. And it's designed to do it very efficiently.
How is it efficient? Does it save energy?
Yes, that's a big part of it. It operates on a natural frequency principle, which means it uses the system's own resonance to help move the material, requiring significantly less horsepower and therefore less energy than brute force feeder designs. Plus, it has a really robust design.
Built tough.
Yeah, it's built to last much longer than cheaper, lighter-duty models.
Right.
Which means it's actually more economical in the long run because you're replacing it less often and dealing with fewer breakdowns and maintenance issues. Less downtime is huge in a factory.
Okay, so it's built to last, saves energy. What else can it do to help manufacturers dealing with all these pressures?
Well, it's incredibly versatile. It's capable of handling very high tonnages, moving large quantities of material, quickly speeds up to 60 feet, or about 18.3 meters per minute.
That's pretty fast.
It is. And as we said, it requires lower horsepower, contributing to its energy efficiency. What's more, it can even handle tricky, sticky materials, like some raw ingredient, mixes with optional special coatings on the trough. And it's built to withstand the high temperatures often found in drying or cooling processes.
And easy to maintain.
Relatively easy to install, and requires low maintenance compared to some other systems. All of that translates directly to less downtime and lower operational costs for the manufacturers. It helps them efficiently move bulk materials and, importantly, precisely control the feed rates into mixers or packaging lines, which is absolutely critical for consistent product quality.
That sounds like a true workhorse, helping the factories run smoother and more efficiently despite other challenges. Beyond the heavy-duty physical equipment, I imagine software and other tech solutions are also playing a huge role now in boosting efficiency and solving these modern problems.
Absolutely. Technology is permeating every aspect. Software is becoming essential for complex tasks, like formulating and optimizing pet food recipes. Think about trying to balance dozens of ingredients to meet AACO nutritional profiles precisely, while also minimizing costs that require sophisticated software.
Using algorithms to find the best mix.
Exactly. And beyond formulation, in a more holistic sense, technology aims to improve efficiency across the entire operation. This comes from providing access to real-time data, from sensors on the production line, from inventory systems, from quality control checks.
So everyone knows what's happening instantly.
Right. It enhances collaboration among different teams, procurement, production, quality assurance, logistics. It improves data management, making it easier to track ingredients, monitor processes, and ensure traceability. It helps significantly reduce waste by optimizing ingredient usage and minimizing production errors. And ultimately, it streamlines entire operations, from ingredient sourcing all the way to final packaging and shipping. It's all about working smarter, not just harder, using data.
So it's not just about making more food, but making it smarter, with less waste, more precision, more efficiency. And all of these challenges, the demand, the supply chain, labor costs, and all these solutions, the tech, the equipment, they all impact the overall pet food market, don't they? Leading to clear winners and losers among different types of pet food, especially as consumer preferences keep shifting.
That's a really critical point, especially looking at the market right now, say in 2024 and beyond. That rising tide of just overall pet ownership growth that we saw lift almost all boats during the COVID-19 pandemic, that's not enough anymore to guarantee success for every brand or every type of pet food.
Why not? What's changed?
We're in a different economic environment now, often post-inflationary, where consumers are more price-conscious, more discerning. Volume growth, meaning the sheer amount of food being sold, is decelerating in many traditional categories. And just raising prices isn't as effective anymore because shoppers might switch brands or look for better value.
So companies have to be smarter about what they offer.
Exactly. And this means that companies looking to acquire other companies or investors looking where to put their money in the pet space are becoming super selective. They're prioritizing segments that show what's called secular growth.
Secular growth. Okay, you mentioned that. Remind us what that means again. Not religious growth.
No, not religious growth. Good question, though. In this business context, secular growth means growth that's driven by long-term fundamental shifts in consumer behavior or market demand, rather than just being a short-term fad or tied directly to the ups and downs of the general economy.
So it's about lasting trends, things that are likely here to stay because people's attitudes or needs have fundamentally changed, like maybe the humanization trend.
Precisely. It's seen as a more stable, sustainable kind of growth that indicates a permanent change in what people want for their pets. Investors love secular growth because it's less risky than betting on a temporary boom.
Ah, okay, that makes sense. So based on that, what are the key areas where investors and big companies are focusing their money in the pet food market right now? What's hot and showing that secular growth potential?
The investment focus is pretty clearly clustering around several key areas. Definitely premium quality food ingredients, nutrition, perceived health benefits. Also, food that offers an attractive price-to-quality ratio, so good value for the money, maybe not the absolute cheapest, but perceived as worth the price.
What else? Health stuff.
Yes, huge focus on health and wellness products. Think foods designed for specific needs, sensitive stomachs, weight management, joint health, foods with functional ingredients. Also, anything that offers pet parent conveniences, big things like home delivery, subscription models, easy to store or easy to serve formats.
And technology.
And of course, the integration of technology, whether that's in the manufacturing process for efficiency and safety, or even customer-facing tech like apps for personalized nutrition plans, or easier reordering.
Okay, let's look at some specifics. Based on recent sales data, say from late 2023, which actual categories are the clear winners, the ones really showing that strong growth?
Yeah, looking at that data, there are some definite standouts demonstrating those trends. Freeze-dried pet food, for example?
The stuff that's super light.
Right. often raw or gently cooked, then freeze-dried. It saw an impressive 21% sales growth, and its share of the total pet food market is steadily increasing. People see it as less processed, nutrient-dense.
Okay, freeze-dried is hot. What else?
Refrigerated and frozen dog food, the stuff we talked about earlier, often marketed as fresh. That category jumped by a massive 32% in sales and, importantly, 13% in volume growth. Its category share also significantly increased. That shows real demand, not just price inflation.
Wow, 32% sales growth. People are definitely embracing the fridge for dog food. What about cats?
For cat owners, semi-moist cat food really stood out. Think those softer kibble types or certain pouch foods. That category showed an astonishing 82% sales growth and 10% volume growth, with its category share also rocketing up.
82%? That's wild. What's driving that?
It could be a combination of palatability, cats can be picky, convenience, and maybe perceived freshness compared to traditional dry kibble. But those numbers show a clear shift in preference for certain cat owners.
So these are all signs of those secular growth trends, right? People wanting fresher, less processed, maybe more specialized or convenient options and willing to pay for them.
Exactly. That's what the data strongly suggests.
Okay, if those are the high-flying winners, what's not doing so well? What are the losers, or at least the categories that are stagnating or declining in this market analysis?
Well, the most notable one is traditional dry kibble. While it's still by far the largest segment of the market in terms of overall volume and dollars.
Yeah, most pets probably still eat kibble.
They do. But overall, traditional kibble saw a negative 1% volume growth in that same period. So sales value might be up slightly due to price increases, but the actual amount being bought dipped a tiny bit.
That's significant, though, right? For such a huge category, even a small volume decline suggests some pet parents are shifting away, maybe towards those freeze-dried or fresh options we just talked about.
That's exactly the interpretation. And looking even broader, the total pet food market, while still showing about 5% sales growth overall, again, likely driven by higher prices.
Yeah.
The data often shows NA or flat for overall volume growth. This indicates a general slowdown in the quantity of food being bought across all categories combined, even as spending goes up. People might be buying less or buying smaller bags or shifting spending patterns.
So this clear split the obvious winners in these niche but growing categories, and the stagnation or slight decline in the biggest traditional category. What does that mean for pet food companies?
It means they have to be really smart and really strategic. They can't just rely on the old formulas anymore. They need to innovate, focus on those high-growth niches, understand what modern pet parents really want, whether it's specific health benefits, ingredient transparency, sustainability, or convenience, and deliver on that.
And for us, the pet parents, what does this market shift mean when we go to the store or shop online?
Well, for you, the pet parent, this translates to generally more choice, especially if you're looking for something specific. You'll likely see continued innovation and competition in those premium, health-focused, and novel format segments, the freeze-dried, the fresh, the specialized diets. That competition can drive quality up and maybe even moderate prices in those niches eventually.
But maybe less innovation in the traditional kibble aisle.
Potentially less radical innovation there, yeah. The focus might be more on maintaining quality, perhaps improving ingredient sourcing or offering better value propositions, but the really exciting boundary-pushing stuff is likely to happen in those growth segments. It's all being driven by what consumers like you are telling the market you want for your pets.
Wow. Okay. Who knew there was so much packed into a simple bowl of pet food? It's actually incredible to trace that line, isn't it?
It really is.
From like basic human scraps in those incredibly inventive historical diets, the bread, the fish sticks, the curate. Gosh.
Right. All the way through the Industrial Revolution of pet food, the invention of kibble and cans.
Then the development of really stringent safety regulations, AAFCO, FDA, HARP-PC.
And finally landing in the complex, high-tech, and super economically driven industry we see today.
It's a true deep dive into something we probably just, scoop out twice a day without a second thought.
It truly is a remarkable journey when you unpack it all. And understanding this whole story, hopefully, helps you appreciate the journey of your own pet's food a bit more.
Yeah, it definitely sheds light on why certain trends exist, why some foods cost way more than others, and just how much effort, science, and technology actually go into ensuring the quality and safety of what our companions eat every single day.
It's not just food in a bag, is it?
Yeah.
It's really a reflection of our changing relationship with our animal companions and our increasing desire as pet parents to give them the absolute best we can.
It's fascinating how something so common, so everyday, can be so complex and have such a rich history when you really dig into it. So for you, our listener, here's a challenge, a little provocative thought to chew on after hearing all this. Think about how that humanization of pets continues to evolve. We treat them more and more like family members every year, it seems.
Definitely. The bond keeps getting stronger.
So what's the next big shift you predict in pet food because of this ongoing trend? Do you think all pet food will eventually be human grade, or is that unrealistic?
Interesting question. What about technology?
Yeah. And how do you imagine technology, maybe AI, maybe personalized nutrition based on DNA tests, who knows? How will technology continue to shape what our pets eat in the next 10 or even 20 years?
Will we be 3D printing personalized meals for Fluffy?
Maybe. This deep dive certainly shows us one thing. What our pets eat is constantly changing, constantly evolving, just like us.
A fascinating field to keep an eye on for sure.
That's your quick glimpse into today's full deep dive. If you want the full breakdown and all the context we couldn't fit here, head over to the full episode of Study Hall, available now wherever you get your podcasts.
And while you're there, make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks for listening, and as always, stay curious.